infectious diseases, research, medicine, health. Welcome to Outbreak News Interviews. And now, broadcasting from the Outbreak News Skylar Studios in beautiful West Central Florida, here is your host, microbiologist and editor of OutbreakNewsToday.com, Robert Harriman.
Well, hey everybody, this is Robert, and welcome to Outbreak News Interviews. Now, rabies post-exposure prophylaxis, or PEP, consists of a rabies vaccine series and human rabies immune globulin, also known as HRIG. Kedrion Biopharma's human rabies immune globulin, Kedrab, was FDA approved in 2017. Now, they recently ran a safety trial on Kedrab in children for the first time. So joining me today to discuss rabies, PEP, and the pediatric trial is James Linakis, MD, PhD. Dr. Linakis is a professor of emergency medicine and pediatrics at Brown Medical School, and he's the associate director of pediatric emergency medicine at Rhode Island Hospital's Hasbro Children's Hospital. Dr. Linakis, welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you.
Well, let's start out the program with a short primer on rabies. What can you tell us about rabies? What do we need to know?
Well, rabies is a viral disease that affects the brain, and most often rabies is transmitted to humans through the bite or scratch of an animal that has rabies, and then the rabies virus, which is present in the animal's saliva, is transmitted through that bite into the person being bitten. And unless treatment is administered to stop it, the virus then travels along the person's nerves to the brain, where it causes a devastating infection. In fact, once the virus has caused an infection in the brain, little can be done to save the life of the infected person. So without an intervention to prevent the virus from spreading to the brain, the infection will have deadly consequences.
Yeah, just about 100% of the time, too, right?
Right.
Yeah. And of course, rabies in children, a big problem because kids are around animals a lot. What can you tell us about rabies in children?
Well, this is an important question. Rabies is important in pediatrics particularly because globally, 40% of individuals bitten by animals suspected to have rabies are children. And as I mentioned before, the rabies virus travels along nerves to its target, the brain. But if you think about it, because children are small, they tend to be low to the ground and consequently are more frequently bitten by animals on the head or on the face. And that means, of course, that the virus has a shorter trip to the brain. And so the urgency of treatment with post-exposure prophylaxis in children may be much greater. Yet up until now, none of the rabies immune globulin that's available in the United States has been explicitly tested in children. And so there's been little data regarding its safety and efficacy in that population.
Yeah, so a bite to the face or the neck or somewhere in the upper area is more considered a much higher risk than other types of bites.
Correct.
Yeah. Dr. Linakis, what does PEP consist of, and what is the role of the different components?
Well, rabies post-exposure prophylaxis is the treatment that's administered to the individual who's been bitten or scratched by an animal with rabies, or an animal suspected to have rabies. And as I mentioned, post-exposure prophylaxis in children was what our study was about. But remember before I said that unless something is done to prevent the spread of the virus to the brain, rabies is deadly. Well, rabies post-exposure prophylaxis is the way that we prevent that spread. It consists essentially of 3 steps. First, immediate and thorough cleansing of the wound with soap and water. And then the next step is injection of rabies immune globulin. Now, rabies immune globulin contains antibodies that bind to the rabies virus and can prevent much of the virus from reaching the central nervous system. The third step is then administration of rabies vaccine. That's usually given as a series of 4 injections over about 2 weeks period of time. And the vaccine allows the patient to develop their own antibodies to the rabies virus and thereby continue to prevent it from reaching the central nervous system. The combination of the immune globulin and the vaccine allows for coverage of the entire time period necessary. So the immune globulin has a rapid onset, starts binding to the virus immediately, but unfortunately doesn't last very long. But it lasts long enough to allow the vaccine to kick in, and the vaccine, which, while it has a slower onset, lasts for much longer, so prevents that virus from getting to the brain.
Now, how quickly does a bite victim need the PEP?
Yeah, that's an important question. I think as far as how quickly post-exposure prophylaxis needs to be started, really time is of the essence. The thorough cleansing of the wound is a big deal, and it really should be carried out immediately. At the same time that that's happening, an animal control officer, medical professionals should be consulted to mobilize treatment if it's needed with rabies immune globulin and rabies vaccine. So we're really talking a very short period of time. The cleaning has to be immediate, and things have to happen pretty rapidly after that.
Okay, let's go ahead and switch gears to the pediatric trial. Dr. Linakis, can you discuss the study and its importance?
Well, our study was carried out at 2 children's hospitals, Hasbro Children's Hospital in Providence, Rhode Island, and the Arkansas Children's Hospital in Little Rock, Arkansas. And it included 30 pediatric patients, ages 0 through 16 years of age, each of whom received Kedrab immune globulin as part of rabies post-exposure prophylaxis following exposure to animals suspected or confirmed to be rabid. And the primary objective of our study was to confirm the safety of Kedrab in the pediatric population. And indeed, Kedrab met its primary safety objectives with no serious adverse events. This, in fact, was the first clinical trial conducted in the pediatric population of any rabies immune globulin available in the United States. Beyond its primary objective, it also demonstrated that there was no incidence of rabies disease or death recorded throughout the 84-day study period. So I think this will be valuable information in helping clinicians understand the safety and the tolerability of this product when it's used in kids.
Yeah, I found that very interesting because kids have been getting HRIG for a long time, right? And this is the first time it's ever been studied for safety and effectiveness.
Yeah, that's correct. And this is kind of a point of emphasis, I think, for most pediatric emergency physicians, and in fact, most pediatricians in general, is that up until a few years ago, many, perhaps most of the drugs that we were using in kids, including rabies immune globulin, have not been tested explicitly in children. And then several years ago, the FDA made it apparent that this was an unacceptable condition, and that they issued the expectation that drugs and things like rabies immune globulin would now be expressly tested in children. So we were really quite pleased to have the opportunity to do this as kind of the first time round for rabies immune globulin.
Yeah. Any final thoughts on rabies, on PEP, or any of the other related topics?
Well, I think that we've covered the important issues for right now. I think that the recognition that an animal bite is potentially a serious issue, is the most important thing. And then the involvement of other people like animal control officers and public health officials who can help factor in whether the animal that's involved has the potential of having rabies. All of that has to happen in a relatively short time span, and I think that really needs to be a point of emphasis. I think also now we have a product that's been tested in children, and we know that the product is going to be safe to use in children.
Very good. And I want to thank you, Dr. Linakis, for your time and your expertise, sir.
Thank you, sir.